Welcome back, everybody, to Between Two Sermons. Great to have you on this maroon edition of Between Two Sermons.
Absolutely. Well,
once again,
maroon or red.
it happens.
Yeah.
We say it every week. Somehow we text each other in the morning. And we're on to Daniel chapter 5 now. Daniel chapter 5. And we have been looking at Nebuchadnezzar as the king of Babylon. His son now comes on the scene. Belshazzar, different than Belteshazzar, which is Daniel's name. Two different variants, kind of the same name.
Yes.
So Bel being the god,
Babylonian god,
or the Canaanite god Baal. And different variants on that name. One, I think Belshazzar is son of Bel, and then Belteshazzar is like you are Bel kind of a deal.
I see. Okay.
So anyway,
no, but
that's a bonus one for you all out there. Yeah,
but not insignificant in the sense of even in the story back to Daniel 5, this Belshazzar takes out the old goblets of the Jewish temple and in sort of an in-your-face kind of way worships the gods of gold and silver and bronze or whatever. So the idea of this, to us these are just odd spellings and odd pronunciations, but the idea of idolatry is a big part of the story. Yeah,
idolatry, and what we've been talking about throughout this book is really also the themes of pride and humility.
Totally.
come into play here. And really, it seems like that's what God is calling out in the heart of Belshazzar in this one.
Yeah.
And he's really calling out pride.
Yeah, there's when I was thinking of this, I mentioned it earlier, John, we were talking before we started the camera, but the chapter 4 and chapter 5 are very similar.
Yeah.
It's almost like, you get to a place in the Bible, I'm sure you've done it, and you think, that kind of gave this message already. But I think they're a study in contrasts. Yeah. Both prideful kings, very prideful, as a matter of fact, for some of the same reasons, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, but the writer perhaps is saying not everyone has to make the same choice.
Yeah.
And in this case, we ended last Sunday, those who listened to that sermon, it was kind of a happy ending for King Nebuchadnezzar. At least it seems.
Yeah.
He seems to have really come around in a genuine way, not just in a superficial way, and acknowledged the God of heaven and humbled himself. The last word of chapter 4 is, God humbles the proud. I think he was talking about himself. But his son, not so much. And here's a guy who was prideful for all the same reasons, but gave in to, wouldn't give in and suffered some consequences.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah, that's it.
And for anyone really in a position of power to realize that position has been given to you by God.
That's right.
Right. It's a very sobering thing.
No
matter, and there's people I'm sure watching this even in positions of power, and this isn't just about this situation. This is also a warning to us, that warning as God writes on the wall with his hand, meeny tekel parson,
right?
That he's doing a judgment in looking beneath the surface of his life, and God sees beneath the surface of our lives.
It's interesting. I didn't get so much to it in the sermon because there's so much there, but your life has been laid in, this is a paraphrase, in the balance and found wanting. There's a whole other truth there, which is God's not only involved in the world and in your life, your life is a I don't know if a test is the right word. It's a stewardship. Your life is a stewardship.
Yeah.
And what he's saying to this man is, you haven't stood up. You failed in your stewardship. Your life has been weighed and found wanting. And it's not, I don't emphasize that to say, God's trying to, is a bad guy up there trying to make us fail, but to say God is paying attention to our lives. He's given us, as you said, whatever he's given us, everything we have is from God, and it's maybe one of the takeaways is we need to realize we're stewards of what God has given us, and don't be fooled, like Nebuchadnezzar was too for a season, of his life, that everything you have is your own work, your own accomplishment, your own sort of you've found it, you've done it, when really much of what you have God has given you.
Yeah, which is the whole part of your first point there. Your life is in God's hand,
right?
That's essentially, I think, what you're talking about there.
Yeah, and I was impressed. I mean, because the passage even says that your life is in God's. He's saying to Belshazzar, he was talking this sort of little mini sermon about his father, and he's saying he learned this truth, you didn't, that your life is in God's hands and your ways.
Yes,
and that's a powerful statement. That is. It should be very encouraging, really. I suppose at some point you can think it's discouraging if you are so resistant or prideful or unwilling to have God in your life, but that's probably not most of us. But then maybe you feel threatened by that. But it's supposed to be. I tried to think of it as a good thing.
Yeah,
that God's life is our life is in His hands, and He can be trusted.
That's a good point. That's a good counterpoint to that, to the seriousness of it. Yeah. And then I love your second point, and I really want to camp out there just for a minute, because you talk about knowing is not enough. I think, right? Is that how you phrased it?
Yeah. The passage helped there, but what's interesting about this this strange handwriting on the wall, once you do a little study, maybe even a basic Bible study would tease this out, or study Bible, is that the words are not really mysterious. It's not like it's in some language that no one's ever seen, right? It's actually Aramaic. It's just like, the words, as I understand it, just from, the standard weights and measures dictionary, ounces, pounds, and whatever. And, but the problem is they don't know what it means. And Daniel has to give meaning to the word. So there's a literal sense in which sometimes we can know the words and not know the meaning. But then in his little sermonette, he says to Belshazzar, he says to him this little riff about his father's response to God and at the end of his life. And he said, "But King, O Belshazzar, you knew these things, but you acted differently." In other words, you had the right information. And you might say Nebuchadnezzar's life was a sermon itself. It was a sermon. You had that sermon. You knew that sermon. And the reason we can say that with confidence is because he asked for the articles of the temple to be, taken out of the archives to use for his party. And he did that on purpose.
Right.
And he even mentions the one my father, he mentions my father's conquered Jerusalem, and let's take those articles. So it tells the writer or the reader that he knew about his father's story, he knew about his father's exploits, and very likely knew where his father came out at the end, which is where chapter 4 ends. And but nevertheless, the fact that he knew that didn't necessarily mean that message sunk down into his heart. Didn't change his life.
Yeah, which is such a challenge for all of us. And the longer we've been, living this Christian life, I think that the greater the temptation to think, oh, I've got it. Like, I know all of this, and therefore my life must be changing.
That's right.
Which is, I think you also did a great job of pointing out the fact, just like, I think about it as a, kid from the 80s, those The More You Know commercials. Remember on NBC, they used to have more you know, dun, 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 like, don't do drugs. Oh, okay.
Oh, right. That's great.
If it was just about the more you know,
right,
those commercials would have ended
right
all of the drug problem in America.
Or seatbelts.
Or whatever it is. We know the things, but just knowing it doesn't mean that it's translating into action.
And that's such a powerful truth beyond the book of Daniel. I mean, the people that crucified Jesus, even much of the Gospels, the conflict is with religious leaders, not with, average street criminals or something. I mean, these are people that knew the Word of God, the Pharisees and sometimes we paint them all in a bad light or in broad brush, but many of them, even the Apostle Paul, were very thoughtful, committed people. But even Paul, who had spent his whole life devoted to the scriptures, from what we understand, had one of the greatest teachers, but he was blind to what those scriptures all pointed to.
Right.
So knowing Isaiah 53 and Micah 5 and all these other things that he knew, he couldn't see what they really meant. And that's a sobering thing.
Yeah. That is a sobering thing. And when it comes to us just living out what we know as well. Like just, are we actually living this?
That's right.
Like, are we, I've been reading through James in my personal time with God this month. I'm kind of going over James over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's the emphasis of James. Like, are you
living it?
Are you living it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You say you believe these things. You say, oh yeah, I have faith. But do you really? Because if you really have faith, it's gonna
change the way you live your life. That's right.
And so some of us need to ask ourselves that question: is my faith genuine? Because if it is genuine, I'll be living that out in my life in one form or another.
Yeah. And it brings us back, as we at the end of this sermon, but next week we'll see what you have up your sleeve. But is to Daniel himself. Daniel seems to have grown. Has lived a long life. His life isn't over yet in Daniel chapter 5, but he seems to be growing in his sort of confidence, convictions in the words that he speaks, of course, to in this case Belshazzar. But he also exemplifies, back to what you were just saying, the transformed life. It doesn't happen overnight. Right. We quit too easily. We fool ourselves sometimes. And Daniel, I think the reason we are talking about him, all these thousands of years later, is because he was someone who played the long game, and he understood that it takes time. He prayed. Even he went back after, you'll talk about it next week, but after all these warnings, he went and did what he always did before. And he our assumption is he did that not just when the cameras were on, and that he was someone who learned how to take what he knew and deepen it down into who he was. And as I sort of said in the last point, ultimately God honors those who not only honor him like it's a quid pro quo, but that really who make God the center of their lives.
Right. And that was the pattern for Daniel, as you pointed out. This is toward the end of his life now. Like this
we're getting there.
Much more. He's an old man now, and we'll talk about next week. Even Daniel in the lion's den. He's not a young
25-year-old guy.
He's like 80.
Right.
Lion's
That's
den.
right.
So and this is right before that.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
So that's a life lived faithfully over the course of time. And God just continuing to do things in his life and through him.
He's a no one's perfect, obviously, except Jesus, but what a great role model. I think he probably learned a lot of hard things. There's a lot not said, but even in this chapter, as well as others, he's demonstrating faith in a faithless world. He continues to live out his faith.
It's a beautiful example for us. So as I think about how we can apply this to our lives, and maybe a question or two that we could think about, is this concept of, is my faith based on just simply what I know?
Right.
Or am I living this out in my life? It might be a good one to go, what do I know? But right now I'm having trouble living this out in the context of my faith. Is there anything in your life that you feel like there's a disconnect with that? And to be honest with yourself, and maybe be honest with the community around you, is there something that I know this in theory, but practically this is tough for me to live out in my life, or I'm having a tougher time living this out? I think that's a great place to start with authenticity with each other, as well as hopefully dig beneath the surface of our lives.
I agree.
So thanks a ton again, Rob, for that great sermon.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. Look forward to seeing you back here next week as we switch seats on Between Two Sermons.